And in advance of the Dubai conference, Ambassador Kramer will be consulting with various governments, both bilaterally and regionally, to exchange U.S. views about priorities for the conference. While in Tokyo, he will meet with the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications and will update representatives from the U.S. telecommunications industry in Japan on the U.S. government's work to promote internet freedom and open access to information. Ambassador Kramer has been in the telecommunications field for more than 25 years, and we're very fortunate to have him with us today. During this availability, Ambassador Kramer will address U.S. efforts in the East Asia Pacific region to work with our partner nations to expand telecommunications access to the Internet and the free flow of information of ideas. So with that, I give Ambassador Kramer to make his opening statements, and we'll take your questions afterwards. Please remember to press 9-1 on your handset to queue up so we know who to unmute for the questions. Ambassador Kramer?
Great, Paul. Thank you very much, and thank all of you for being here today. It's been a pleasure being here in Tokyo. And as Paul mentioned, the World Conference on International Telecommunications is being held by the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union. All or nearly all of the International Telecommunication Union's 190 members will send delegates to this conference, which will last for just under 2 weeks, December 3rd to 14th. This is an extremely important intergovernmental meeting because it's going to review the International Telecommunication Regulations, the ITRs as we call them, which haven't been updated since 1988. And given the numerous changes that have happened in the telecom and internet sector since then, the conference could have a real impact on how the world communicates far into the future. This December at the conference, all nations should work collaboratively to ensure that the treaty continues to foster an environment for mobile and telecommunications success, one that benefits citizens, consumers, and societies. And we all recognize the importance of the telecommunications network as well as the Internet. And we want to be sure that entrepreneurs, companies, engineers, and universities have the opportunity to innovate far into the future. In this way, citizens benefit by utilizing more means of communication with each other. Consumers benefit by securing more and more ways to access the Internet with innovative devices, and societies benefit with the resulting increase in gross domestic product and other economic benefits. This conference is particularly important for our two countries, given the importance of the global Internet to our economies. In many ways, we have both taken leadership roles in creating a productive environment for the growth of Internet and telecommunications. And this same phenomenon has happened regionally with the importance of the region in those sectors. So I've been looking for ways to forward and to share our views with our colleagues and with our counterparts on how we can continue to improve and promote that success. Before opening up to questions, I'd like to describe how we're preparing for this conference, and I'd like to describe at a high level the American approach and philosophy and our views on some of the more well-known issues. Just in the past week, we have completed the process of naming all of the members of our delegation. We'll be bringing roughly 100 delegates from both the federal government and the private sector. Our delegation represents a cross-section of expertise from industry, civil society, and government agencies. Many of these individuals have been working in international telecommunications, the Internet, and related fields for years and in some cases for decades. And they've been helping us to prepare for this conference for many months as well. Meanwhile, I've been traveling internationally, conducting bilateral meetings and attending ITU regional meetings to discuss the various proposals for this conference. In the past few weeks, I've been to Dubai, to Accra in Ghana, San Salvador, and Geneva for a workshop held by the ITU to plan for the WICET and as well here. I will be in Beijing later this week, and after that we'll be in Baku for the Global Internet Governance Forum meetings. Throughout my travels, it's been a real privilege to meet with officials and other delegation heads to exchange views on the WICET and to delve into the issues they are facing. This has been particularly true in Africa and in the UAE, where we had some very productive and frank discussions. I'll now share with you a bit of what I've been sharing around the world regarding the U.S. views on the upcoming ITRs. The U.S. believes that the current ITRs have been remarkably flexible in creating success and opportunities for the dynamic international telecom sector that we have today. That is why in our initial tranche of proposals, filed in early August, we advocated using the existing ITR text as the baseline for any new treaty. That is why we proposed only minimal changes to the definition of telecommunications service and recognized operating agencies. We also recommended maintaining the voluntary nature of compliance with ITU recommendations. In addition, at the ITU's regional preparatory meeting for the Americas last month in El Salvador, the United States successfully supported several inter-American proposals that I will briefly mention. They include establishing consensus positions on establishing the general position that cybersecurity should be excluded from the ITRs and specifically indicate that the ITR should not address security issues that relate to cybercrime, national security, or national defense. We also achieved consensus positions to support transparency with regard to global mobile roaming rates and consumer offerings, but not supporting language on rate levels. We also achieved consensus positions that called for retaining the current definition of telecommunications and continuing to apply the ITRs only to recognized operating agencies, a term that denotes authorized carriers that provide services to the public, and a consensus position that the ITR should not be expanded to sweep in cybersecurity. You can see from these proposals that we view the ITRs as a high-level document that sets mutually agreed norms, not as a narrow code of regulations that would have to be rewritten every few years. I want to emphasize, however, that we do not advocate doing nothing. For example, we have proposed a significant change to the ITRs that would recognize the nearly universal adoption of commercially negotiated traffic agreements. These changes would mark a turning point away from monopoly, state-controlled telecommunication markets, recognizing the success and continued promise of liberalized telecom markets. This is important because it illustrates what we want the rest of the world to know about our basic philosophy, which can be summed up in the following points. The ITR should promote market-based solutions and approaches, not regulatory ones. Growth and investment in the international telecom market will be driven by consumer demand and will result in benefits for citizens and societies, not governments. National governments should hold the key to investment potential through liberalization, competition, and other pro-growth philosophies. International telecommunications and the Internet will thrive wherever there is free and open access to content and information. This philosophy is the cornerstone of the model that today is empowering millions of people to participate in the information society. It is the model that has allowed the Internet to flourish and take on infinite forms in response to infinite local, regional, and national needs. Make no mistake, this is not a U.S. model. It is truly a global model, and the evidence can be found in higher growth rates for Internet usage in developing countries than in developed markets. For example, the annual growth rate in the number of Internet users in Africa over the past decade has been 33%, almost double the rate in Asia and Latin America, each with a growth of 17%, and well ahead of the growth rate in Europe at 10% and the U.S. and Canada at 4%. According to the ITU, mobile broadband services grew by 78% last year in developing countries, nearly double the world growth rate of 40%. As we move forward to Dubai, we are increasingly focused on communicating our commitment to this global model of growth in international connectivity because we have seen how it works and know the impact it will make on citizens, consumers, and societies. This does not mean, however, that we don't see challenges, deficits, or inequalities in access to international telecommunications. Far from it. There are still many societies with pent-up demand for international connectivity and broadband infrastructure in particular. We agree with many partners around the world that there are significant issues involved with broadband deployment and with cybersecurity as well. The United States has now prepared additional contributions to the wicket. Along with the aligned proposals we have reached with our America's partners, we will be examining proposals to respond to the views we have heard expressed by other countries' governments. One of the chief areas of global concern is a perceived lag in broadband infrastructure development. In part, perhaps the perception has not caught up with the reality. International capacity has grown rapidly in developing countries in recent years. For example, the figure for international data capacity serving Africa has increased by several orders of magnitude, from 1.2 gigabits per second in 2001 to 571 gigabits per second by 2011. By the end of this year, more than 25 terabits per second of submarine cable capacity will link Africa to the rest of the world. Looking at developing countries as a whole, investment and revenues grew by 22% during the period from 2007 to 2011, while developed country revenues stagnated in the recession. Nevertheless, there is clearly pent-up demand for broadband in many countries, and the potential for growth is foreshadowed by the rapid take-up of mobile voice services in these countries over the past 2 decades. So one of the issues we are talking to other governments about is how to tap the potential for investment in new broadband infrastructure. We think there are real issues to be addressed by member states with the assistance of the ITU and other organizations. And any toolkit for regulators, we believe, should include introducing and facilitating international gateway competition and co-location, encouragement of international fiber optic consortia, dismantling any remaining barriers to competition in the provision of international telecommunications services, providing access to sufficient mobile spectrum to enhance 3G and 4G services abroad, encouraging easy and open access to the Internet with all the richness of unique content, connectedness, and commercial innovation, which creates opportunities for economic growth. We also believe a major piece of the puzzle is content generation. While this is not an issue for the ITRs per se, we believe governments, through public-private partnerships, will help from intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations and have a role to play in setting the proper foundation for relevant native language content. Ultimately, the objective should be to benefit consumers, citizens, and societies. One of the other areas of common debate on the ITRs of concern is regarding the integrity of networks in an era of hackers, malware, and malignant content. As we have made clear, we do not think that regulatory solutions are an effective way to solve these problems, but we do recognize that the problem exists. Indeed, there are over 67,000 malware attacks every day around the world, which represents a doubling of attacks since 2009. The reason we see inclusion of security text in the ITRs as a dead end is that it would apply a regulatory mallet where a technology and policy scalpel is required. What is needed is not the insertion of several lines of text in a high-level treaty document that focuses on traffic delivery. There are many aspects of cybersecurity, each one requiring different expertise to address effectively. Countries need comprehensive capacity building, international cooperation, and training, and the U.S. is open to dialogue on ways to make such cooperation more comprehensive, building on work by existing institutions at the national, regional, and international levels. So in conclusion here, as we move closer to the conference in Dubai, the U.S. delegation won't be shy about pointing out the success of the international telecommunications sector and the Internet environment that has been created as a result. We should congratulate ourselves for everything that has been achieved, but self-congratulations are not enough. As developing nations rightly point out, we have to use the technology and tools we have developed to expand global access to international telecommunications capacity and to the benefits of broadband transmission and the Internet. The wicket is at a crossroads. We can continue to advance our current path based on a broad-based, multi-stakeholder, consumer-driven, and liberalized model. We know this model works, or we can take a side road back to antiquated business models and regulatory intrusions that were never designed for the diverse and dynamic markets we have today. The risk is that we will suffocate growth and ultimately benefit no one. I believe that together we'll make the choice to go forward, to build on our successes, and to provide greater opportunities for more consumers, citizens, and societies. This can and should be our legacy for future generations. Now I'd like to take any questions you have.
Okay. Thank you, Ambassador Kramer, for that very thorough introduction. And I think this will allow our journalists to tailor their questions to specific areas of interest. I will point out that the Ambassador referenced the term WICET several times. That is the World Conference on International Telecommunications that we mentioned at the beginning, just for folks who may have tuned in late. Okay, Tim, do you have? Yeah, but anyone who has a question for Ambassador Kramer, please press 9-1 on your handset, and then we can unmute you. I will ask a question of the Ambassador while I have him before anybody else chimes in. Mr. Ambassador, looking at the ITRs and the possible changes that we predict may come out of the Dubai conference, at the end of the day, will it mean less expensive telecommunications capacity for the average consumer and greater access?
Yeah, so Paul, thanks for the question. The ultimate goal and the vision here is to create an environment for success for the telecom and internet industries. And what that should mean is that the markets are liberalized, and you look at telecom, you have a variety of providers. They create a variety of solutions for consumers. That drives down prices. That increases broadband availability. And so that, to us, would be a great outcome. And then on the internet side, to create, quote-unquote, a free and open internet. So people have the ability with the internet to stay connected with one another on a human level, whether that's social media or other ways. And that commercially, they're able to use the internet for whatever business ventures they're in. Many entrepreneurs are innovators, and they need to have the benefit of the internet to access best practices. They may be using it for, e-commerce, etc. And so creating affordable broadband access and a free and open internet so that people can, again, create this connectedness and commercial opportunity, we think would be a great outcome.
Okay, and I'll ask one more question because I have the luxury of having you. Several of our partner nations in this region have made a transition from completely controlled state media to a more open media environment. Other countries are still progressing through that transition. How do we see the role of state-controlled media or severe regulation by the state as a possible impediment to future internet growth?
Yeah, and so there's two angles to that question, Paul. The first one is an economic one. If you look at the heritage of the telecom industry and the mobile industry going back to the 80s, originally there was a need to get these industries started. And what was set up originally is what was called a termination rate environment, where basically if you called a mobile phone, you had to pay a termination fee that then went to the telco in that market to help them build out their networks. That model is one that worked very early on, but isn't needed anymore because now there's a variety of providers in the market. The consumer demand is strong. What is happening is some nations are still falling back on that model, saying, well, that's now what we need for the internet environment, that we need money, people that pay us to build out our networks. The problem with that model is if you assign a fee to internet traffic, to content, etc., you have two risks. One is that traffic won't be delivered, period. So if you have companies, whether they be in Japan, whether they be in Malaysia, China, anywhere, and they're developing that traffic and advancing it, that traffic may have a very high fee to get it delivered to whether it's the U.S., whether it's Africa, whether it's the Middle East. And many companies and nonprofits will say, I don't want to send the traffic there. Or what they'll do is they'll start charging a fee to the end user. So the benefit we have today with the internet is it's quote-unquote free. You have free access to search and free access to news and free access to online education, the Khan Academy, the variety of organizations. And to have the end user have to pay a fee basically would stifle that demand. And so we feel in aggregate that's a losing proposition. And every example you can look at for success has been based on markets liberalizing. And what does that involve? That involves government saying, you know what, we're going to create mobile spectrum. In many cases, we're going to auction that to investors, whether those investors be within a country or outside the country or in a consortia, and create multiple providers of mobile phone service. Similar to what we have here in Japan and many markets, that option creates a lot more usability for the end user, lower prices, etc., that then again stimulates demand. As that demand grows, you have economic growth. That economic growth in turn creates more demand, and it creates this virtuous cycle of growth. And so that's why we feel being on that path for liberalization is so critical. The other angle on this is on content. And in the area of content, what's very important is content can flow freely. If content in any way is restricted, you restrict these opportunities that I talked about. You restrict opportunities commercially because people can't get the information they need to transact with other people. You restrict the ability of people to talk to one another. You restrict the ability of a population to educate itself. And so there's a variety of proposals on the content side that seek to control traffic and control traffic management, saying traffic can only move in a certain way. That opens up the door candidly for censorship, and we think censorship of content restricts a lot of opportunities, whether it be democracy and free speech, whether it be economic opportunities, etc. It also raises costs. Because today, the way the internet works is you have a lot of different players that run internet networks and transmission. As a matter of fact, to give you a factoid on that, there's 425,000 global IP networks today, routes where traffic is distributed. Those have all been negotiated commercially. The prices have come down dramatically, and that benefits consumers. It benefits society by having that inexpensive transmission. If somebody comes in and says, now you need to handle your traffic in a set way with a certain provider, costs go up. And that's where the industry was years ago. And again, it created a very costly environment for internet access. And so that's why we say, keep the environment distributed, keep it open, don't set up regulation, don't mandate activities here. A lot of that natural growth and goodness will come by allowing that innovation to occur.
We must be doing a good job of answering people's questions, Ambassador, because we haven't had my time in yet. Remember to please press 9-1 on your handset, and we will unmute you for your question. Mr. Ambassador, smartphones. We're seeing them explode here in Japan. Last year, I believe I saw the statistic that Japan had a 6% penetration of smartphones. This year, it's already close to 50%. Obviously, that carries certain concerns over bandwidth capability and the ability to move the content you're talking about. How does the U.S. position at the World Conference, and how do our efforts here in the region and around the world proactively address the issue of explosion of smartphone technology in these countries?
Yeah. So first of all, Paul, that is a very good problem to have. If we had to rank order everything, smartphones are becoming more and more pervasive, and in developing markets, you have huge growth of smartphones as prices are moving down. And if you hear people like Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, now the chairman of Google, he will talk about Moore's Law. We have productivity improvement in devices, and talks about $50 smartphones in the next 2-3 years. And if you look at the number of people today that don't have internet access, 2, 3, 4 billion, there's a very strong argument that they will have access through mobile networks, and they'll have it through affordable smartphones. So the first message is this is a good problem to have. You don't want to have the opposite problem where there's not demand and there's no crunch on spectrum, etc. So then the second thing gets to is in how do you manage all this traffic and spectrum that's coming across. Many nations, and we see this as a best practice, are getting very smart about effective spectrum utilization, deciding where the spectrum needs to be made available. And in the U.S., as you take as an example, there's been a reallocation with incentives for broadcasters to release spectrum for the mobile operators because the mobile operator growth has been so good. And one of our points is we should be identifying these best practices for a lot of nations so they can decide what's right for them in their environment to create that spectrum. That spectrum creates a notable source of revenue. So if you look at governments are anxious to get revenues, which is very understandable, do it via mobile spectrum auctions. Don't do it via charging the end consumer for access, which again restricts traffic. So being smart about what the demand is for the spectrum, making sure you're smart about doing mobile spectrum awards, and making sure that the mobile operators use the most advanced technologies, LTE, which by the way Docomo has launched here in Japan. A lot of those technologies will allow for a lot better capacity improvement. All of that cycle creates this great outcome, which is more and more people have internet access, more and more people can use a mobile device on the go for whatever they need. Society should create a new revenue source because of GDP growth that then creates more demand for mobile and the internet, etc. That's again the virtuous cycle that we love to see.
Mr. Ambassador, you mentioned the issue of roaming and roaming technology, roaming access, roaming charges. Unmute everybody. And that is an issue that obviously we see when we travel here in the region, different standards in different countries. Will the discussions in Dubai address the varying standards in different countries and how to harmonize those standards more effectively?
Yeah, so on mobile roaming specifically, today there's pretty good alignment of technology that people can take their mobile phones wherever they go, use them, etc. There's a common message that mobile roaming is costly. And our view on this is there needs to be a lot of advancement on transparency of rates, transparency of usage. What we don't believe should happen is there should be rate regulation. That government should step in and say this rate is too high, this rate is too low, this rate needs to be adjusted, etc. That we feel the market should be deciding where those rates need to go. And so we've been advocating advancing, again, this transparency effort because we think that's the best outcome. By the way, in several of these areas, too, you have the risk of unintended consequences. So if somebody were to say, listen, we think international rates should be the same as domestic rates, you have the risk that domestic rates will go up. You have the risk that handset pricing will go up. And all of these are unintended consequences that aren't positive. The last message I'll just give you is on mobile roaming, when you really drill down to where is the biggest issue, in many cases it's a regional issue. It's not a truly global issue. So in the Americas region where we're located, a lot of the roaming rates within South America, within Central America, between the U.S. and Canada, that's where the biggest roaming traffic is, not international roaming. And that's actually something that should be sorted individually between nations, not in a context of 190 nations, on a global basis.
I want to confirm, Japan, do you have any questions, Japan times? Okay, Hanoi, do you have any questions? And Bangkok, any questions? Okay. Well, Mr. Ambassador, do you have any concluding remarks you'd like to make today to our guests before we sign off?
Yeah, the last thing I'd say is two messages. First of all, thank you all for being part of this because we appreciate the engagement on this. This is an important set of issues that we're discussing. This gets to my second point. It isn't just the outcome in December in Dubai that is so significant here. It is the precedent that we're setting, the norms that we're setting, the values we're setting about what will the internet look like in the future. Will it be free and open? What will communications look like? Will we encourage liberalization? That future discussion is actually the biggest implication of this conference. And so we take very seriously what is going to happen at this conference and the precedent it sets up for future generations. We've had huge success globally. Let's keep that success moving along. So that would be my final remark. And again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kramer. That's very informative, and I think for all of us a good primer on what's to come in December. We will make the transcript and the audio from this session available online to those of you who are on the call and as well as our partner media in the region. Thank you very much.